Is it true that mankind evolved gradually from zero-growth animals into modern mankind? The question of the origin of mankind has been a subject of controversy since the dawn of our civilization. Throughout the ages, we have always wondered whether everything in the world needs an omnipotent creator. Various religions have different interpretations and myths about this. For example, according to the Christian religion, the first human being in the world was created from dust by God, and then a rib of Adam was used to create a doll, which became the ancestor of human beings. In our traditional Chinese culture, Taoism holds that after Pangu created the heavens and the earth, the female dolls created human beings from clay. However, with the accumulation and advancement of scientific data, our modern human beings are more inclined to believe in the theory of evolution of species through natural selection as proposed by Charles Darwin. However, although the theory of evolution describes the evolution of our species, it does not mean that the evolutionary theory of human beings is not a theory of evolution. Now, the process of gradual evolution, but the lack of a clear intermediate transition pattern in the fossil record, has led some people to doubt the completeness of the evolutionary process of mankind. Today, we will try to find out from a scientific point of view that if the theory of evolution is wrong, then what is the true origin of mankind? First of all, through the study of the behaviors of various species of animals, Darwin found that each species has a very high degree of adaptability in terms of adapting to its environment and ecological role, and that it has a very high degree of adaptability in terms of adapting to its environment and ecology. Each species is highly adaptable to its environment and ecological role. He also noted that African monkeys were more similar to humans than to any other animals. Based on his research, Alvin concluded that all living things are interrelated and share a common origin. In his book, The Origin of Species, he elaborated on the theory of natural selection and other related important points. Genetics is the study of genetic mechanisms. It explores how genetic traits are transmitted from one generation to the next by means of genetic material. Moreover, the Dutch microbiologist Antony van Leeuwenhoek, who studied human beings and regarded them as part of the animal kingdom, believed that every human being possessed the potential for a new life in the uterus of a woman. At the same time, in 1866, Guigal Mendel, who was regarded as the father of the science of heredity, put forward the rationale that heredity is controlled by factors present in all the cells, and that these factors are passed from one generation of an individual to the next through the embryo, thus determining the hereditary characteristics of the succeeding generation. Shortly afterwards, in 1866, Darwin proposed the theory of the paradigm, whereby every part of the body produces tiny particles called paradigms, which then pass through the bloodstream and are transmitted by the blood. He believed that every part of the body produces tiny particles called phanerogens, which are then transmitted to the embryo through the bloodstream, thus affecting the hereditary characteristics of the offspring. We know that genes are controlled by genes, which are specific segments of chromosomes composed of DNA and protein sequences that determine the traits and characteristics of the offspring. The transfer of these genetic traits is strong evidence that different organisms share a common origin. Now we come back to the original question of how life began on Earth. According to scientists, there are 4 basic conditions. Firstly, the original atmosphere must have the conditions to support life. Secondly, there must be enough of the necessary chemical substances present. Thirdly, there must be sufficient sources of energy. And thirdly, there must be enough time for the gradual development and evolution of life. Therefore, according to our study of the evolutionary time of bacteria and carbonic acid in rocks, life on the Earth began about 370 million years ago, and the Earth itself was formed about 600 million years ago. During this time, the Earth's primary atmospheric hydrocarbons, water vapor and methane, are key components, while energy sources include solar radiation, electrical storms, and volcanic eruptions. As the Earth cooled down, water vapor condensed into liquid water, forming vast oceans and lakes. These bodies of water became the cradle of life, providing a nurturing environment for the first organisms to develop. One of the earliest theories regarding the origin of life is known as autogenesis. This theory suggests that life can spontaneously arise from lifeless matter. For instance, in the past, it was believed that emptiness could spontaneously generate from rotten fruit or decaying food. However, as time passed and science advanced, it was gradually understood that the void actually hatched from the eggs of the camp, which were the result of the reproductive behavior of the camp and not spontaneously produced. The theories of biochemist Alexander Oparin and British biologist Haldane on the origin of life became the most widely accepted. Their theories suggested that the conditions of the primordial environment were conducive to the production of life, and that the conditions were quite different from those of the present time, and that through a series of chemical reactions, chemical substances on the primordial globe were gradually combined to form living organisms. This theory was tested in the 1953 years by the American chemist Stanley Miller, who successfully modeled the conditions of the primordial Earth to produce amino acids, fatty acids, and bases. With the development of life, the earliest organisms were heterotrophs, who could not produce their own food, but obtained their energy by fermentation of other organic compounds. Later, the autotrophs produced food by photosynthesis and oxygen as a byproduct. The occurrence of the macro-oxidizing event led to the production of large quantities of oxygen, which caused the formation of the atmosphere. During this period, many organisms that depended on the oxygen-rich environment died in an extinction event known as the Great Oxygenation Event. Oxygen reacted with the ultraviolet light to produce ozone, which ultimately formed the ozone layer on our planet, and the initially single-celled organisms gradually evolved into multicellular organisms. In the process, the cells began to differentiate and form into different types, gradually combining to form an even more complex organismal structure. This process is an important stage in the development of life, and is the basis for increasing biodiversity. Every organism has similar genetic enigmas, the process of life and the response to stimuli, and these similarities follow genetic rules. These commonalities indicate that we share a common ancestor and are supported by a common genetic code. For example, the number of cardiac patterns in different animals indicates the stage of evolution. Fish have 2 ventricles, frogs have 3, and frogs have 2 ventricles. In the earliest hominids, the African black star was found to have 4 limbs. Similarly, birds and insects have wings, but of different structures, or many vertebrates have limbs of similar structure, but with different functions. In addition, many animals have non-functional organs, such as the third eye, the eyelid, the kunlans, cats, dogs, and other animals. The blue tail of man is one of the most famous examples. These organs are the participation of previously useful but now redundant ancestral organs. Our human tailbone still exists to show our relationship with distant relatives. Moreover, the most interesting feature of evolutionary theory is Darwin's natural selection. As the number of organisms increased rapidly, food and space became limited, and the struggle for survival began, in which only those species with the capacity for vigorous variation and adaptation could survive and reproduce. Over many generations, the accumulation of these variations would give rise to new species. In 1901, the Dutch botanist Eugène de Vries suggested that because of the randomness of the genetic structure, it would be possible to produce new species. Mutations. A new species can appear within a generation. Life first started in the ocean, and then slowly migrated to the land to produce amphibians and reptiles. During the Archean period, mammals evolved from reptiles, stoneworms, and mammals gave rise to primitive primates such as fox monkeys. From these round monkeys, the higher primates, which we know today as roundel species and monkeys, emerged. The evolution of roundel species deviated from the rest of the primate lineage about 40 million years ago and were replaced by an early African ancestor, the common ancestor, which is known as the roundel. This common ancestor gave birth to the black scarabs and the great scarabs, and then the evolution of modern metazoans began in Asia and Africa. These primitive humans included the llamas and sivas of India and the Kenyans of Africa. It is worth noting that between 50 and 20,000 years ago, among the earliest hominid sources, the African black star was in the form of the Himalayan star, which was the first to be discovered in Africa. About 250,000 years ago, the human universal system and the black star began to develop in 2 separate directions of evolution. And then about 20,000 years ago, the black star, the first human star resembling that of modern man, appeared on the Earth. About 250,000 years ago, the human common system and the black star began to develop into 2 separate directions of evolution. Then about 200,000 years ago, the first modern human-like human form appeared. But it was not until about 100,000 years ago that this human form began to dominate the human group. The earliest modern human fossils date back some 35,000 years. This evolutionary journey spanned millions of years and was characterized by many changes. Over time, different species have evolved and new species have been created that share the same ancestry. However, we sometimes misunderstand some aspects of evolutionary theory. For example, In the past, people may have thought that birds have the ability to fly because they strive to do so or because they desire to do so. Evolution, however, tells us that birds have the ability to fly because there existed in their ancestors individuals with blue-bridged skeletons and feather structures that made it easier for them to fly in the air than others, increasing their chances of survival and reproduction and thus being passed on to their descendants. Similar evolution is often associated with the concept of survival of the dead. However, this does not mean that only the strongest animals survive. Penguins, for example, survive in the extreme cold of the Antarctic, while camels in the desert have adapted to high temperatures and drought. Whether we accept this theory or not, this evolutionary process is real. It does not force us to abandon our principles and beliefs, but it provides us with the history of our ancestors, which includes all living things in a single structure. The history of our ancestors brought all living things into a unified structure and helped us to understand the history and mechanisms of evolution through the study of genes, heredity, and environment. Although we still have many unanswered questions about the origins of life, we do know that life requires the right environmental conditions and sufficient time for its emergence. The fact that we realize that all life has a common origin suggests that the theory of evolution may not be false. So, do you believe in the theory that mankind originated from primates? Let us know your different views and opinions in the comments section. Thank you for your patience and attention, and we will see you next time.